Welcome back to Have You Heard? My name is Zoe. I'm one of the co founders and the managing director. And today I'm joined by Lucy, who is our influencer marketing director.
Hi.
um, Today, Lucy and I are going to chat a little bit about one of the biggest frustrations that we have whenever it comes to how brands at times can approach influencer marketing. So, yeah, I think we can just sort of get straight into it. And so I think the biggest frustration for us is whenever brands come to us and they treat influencer marketing as a channel that can just be turned off and turned back on again. And it's like you wouldn't do that with your paid media. You wouldn't do that
Mm-mm.
with your organic social. And if you did do that with either of those, then that's daft in the same way that it's daft to do it with influencers.
Mhm.
Um, and I think we talked about it earlier, but influencer marketing really is about building relationships. And that's also building relationships with the influencers so that they're building longer term relationships with their audience, with your brand in turn. It's like a little cube basically of connections. But yeah, I think it'd probably be helpful if you can just chat through some of the approaches and briefs that will sort of land on your doorstep. And I think we've done quite a lot of work with a number of clients recently where we've done a lot of educating around the importance of ambassadors and longer term partnerships. But yeah, just be good to get into it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm also glad you mentioned how it really can't be an off and on type approach, because I actually remember when I first started out and I was doing paid media, and the approach then was switch on the paid social campaign for a bit and then you turn it
It's just
off,
so
and it's
silly.
bonkers. And I remember having to be like, no, we need to have this always on approach and everything. And now it's like, it's good that we're getting to a point where I think more and more brands are starting to understand you do have to have more of an always on approach with influencers. I mean, yeah, we do often get a lot of briefs come through, and it might be around, a product launch or, raising awareness for a particular campaign, like a wider brand campaign or something. So we can support with influencers more on an awareness and engagement basis. But it is really key that as brands, when you're working with influencers, you're realizing that they are just they're an extension of building out and reaching your target
Hmm.
audience ultimately. And, you might have different segments of your particular target audience that you want to be reaching and everything. And influencers can absolutely help you to achieve that. So it's not always about just kind of, here's a big campaign, loads of great content, everything like that. It's really important, and brands really recognize it, that there's got to be return on investment
Yeah.
from that influencer activity. And the way that you can really start to achieve that is having these longer term partnerships. So, working with the best performers from said starting campaign that you did with influencers potentially, or maybe you've done a few of those campaigns in particular. But it's important to remember that introducing continuous new faces as a brand in terms of influencers, you're never going to really be driving the sort of results that you
And it
want.
doesn't drive any type of brand affinity.
It
So
doesn't.
I think for those listening for context, at times a brands will just want a continuous stream of newly sourced lists,
Hmm.
and they might have two campaigns a year that they might want to run over the course of 4 weeks for the first campaign, 6 weeks for the second campaign, and they'll continually want new faces for that. Whereas when we say influencers should be always on, I mean, I do believe that it should be always on, but it could be that you have a campaign that spreads over 3 months and you've got multiple bursts of content coming from
Hmm.
influencers. What it categorically should not be is a campaign that is 4 weeks long that has 8 influencers in it and they all post one piece of content. It makes absolutely no sense, and you're going to see very limited results from it. So I think it's just about being really mindful and also putting organic principles at the core of it, because particularly if you're using macro influencers who are expensive, they're reliant on their content consistently hitting the algorithm to get those results, and the algorithm is volatile to say the least. So they're probably going to want to realistically have a couple tries to get
Hmm.
those reach levels up as high as they can, and a good macro influencer will probably suggest that as well, that they wouldn't want to do a one hit wonder.
Absolutely.
um So yeah, there's a couple sort of things that tend to
And it could
happen.
even be the case of you work with, say, like 3 or 4 of the same influencers throughout the whole year, and they just kind of you could be working with them on an affiliate basis, so it could be once a quarter they're creating content for you, or it could be that you just generally have a partnership with them and it's, "We want you to be creating 5 pieces of content throughout the year," and maybe it's at key times when you have, like, I don't know, particular piece of other marketing activity happening or whatever, but you could do it in that kind of approach. It
Mhm.
doesn't always have to be working with tons and tons of different influencers. And really, as a brand, you don't want to be having loads and loads and loads of different people. Like the pool that you could potentially be working with, really, you're going to want that most of the time to actually be quite a small pool of people to
I think
represent your brand.
for influencers and for brand awareness is definitely a smaller quantity and a higher quality,
Yeah.
I would suggest. And then when you can get into high quantity is whenever you're using content creators for performance and you can be quite
Hmm.
like cutthroat about what is working.
Yeah.
And you will start to see a drop off if you don't diversify that
Hmm.
pool a little bit more, but they are very different in terms of what they achieve. Um, and I think the other thing to just remember about influencers is that they're all individual. So it needs to be sort of optimized on a regular basis, and
Hmm.
the way we would suggest to do that would be launch an influencer ambassador program or an always on approach. Set out the influencers that you're going to use, review it after 3 months. And if people are underperforming against the metrics that you've set out and
Hmm.
your success benchmarks, then it may be time to pause that partnership and invest that in a new
Hmm.
influencer and see how that goes for 3 months. And then slowly, as you refine down that program, you're going to end up after 9, 12 months with a pool of influencers that have achieved great brand recognition for you, have built relationships with audiences, and you can continue to grow those partnerships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you know, in terms of like choosing who should be your brand ambassador as well, that's where you can be a bit more selective in terms of, do they really align with like our target customer? Do they really align with like our brand ethos and everything? Maybe not so much around like corporate values.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that is can be frustrating at times is that clients will kind of be like, our corporate values are XYZ, if that makes sense. And your influencer should not necessarily be someone that you would hire to work in your
No.
office. Like, they're realistically, if we're trying to achieve brand fame, they should be the kind of boundary pushing people, not absolutely aligned with if they're offensive or like,
Yeah, there's a brand
yeah.
safety, part of it. Like when we're vetting
Mhm.
influencers, just ensuring they're not going to do anything that potentially might harm the brand reputation, or, if they're constantly swearing in their content, and you're like maybe a very family focused brand, or maybe not even if that's so much the case, or, as long as they're not talking about anything that could be, potentially offensive to a particular
Yeah.
audience, those are like, that's you don't even need to worry about like that. That's just like standard
Yeah.
when we're vetting particular influencers and everything. But yeah, it's you know absolutely you do want to be a bit more thorough, and you want to be ensuring that they're not they don't have a really tight relationship with a potential competitor
And
or anything.
checkbacks on, we've all seen the nightmares of influencers rising up really quickly, and then someone goes on their Twitter and sees that
Hmm.
they've made like awful tweets from like 6 years ago. And realistically, that influencer's management should be all across
a
that. And
hundred
if they're
percent.
not, then poo poo on them.
Hmm.
But at the same time, it's also our duty to check those things
Yeah.
as well as an agency recommending that
Hmm.
influencer. Um, but I guess the sort of the main point to get across is that if you are aligning to a set of corporate values that you would almost put in at like interview stage for someone, you're always going to end up with really safe people, and you're going to miss that real like personality kick that you can get from
Yeah,
influencers.
for sure.
And the thing is that sometimes influencers can say things that you might want to say, but that may not be appropriate for you to say as a business. And so
Hmm.
they can be quite a good way of you getting key messaging in there that you might not want to push yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, ultimately it's, working with people who feel like they can almost act as the face of your brand on a longer term basis. have real relevance with your audience as
Mhm.
well, or at least a particular segment of your target audience. And
I mean,
yeah.
TA is the most important thing, so target audience, because a lot of the time brands will go like, "That person looks like someone that should be an influencer for us,"
Hmm.
but then you delve into their audience figures, and it could be that you've got like a a male fitness influencer, and you want to target men, but actually 80% of their audience is women because they're posting
Yeah.
thirst traps all day long.
Yeah.
So
Just, yeah, exactly.
so it's kind of like making sure that you're not being, this sounds so bad, but like fickle whenever
Hmm.
looking at influencers, and like really delving into the data and
Yeah.
understanding
Because
it.
sometimes what can happen, and I've very much been there, and like you're in a board meeting or presenting to like a board of directors about influencers, and you're saying, um, you're showing them all your influencer results and everything. And for them in particular, who are not involved in any way, shape, or form in the day to day of that activity, can be very attracted to the whole like big numbers, like big name. Oh, I've heard of them, or oh, my daughter or wife or whoever, like, or partner, like knows of them, loves them, blah blah blah, like, yeah, more of that. And it can be really attractive to go for all of the like that side of
But
things.
it quite often it doesn't perform, and we have
Exactly.
it a lot where um often digital marketing teams report into to teams that might not actually understand influencer marketing that well, and we'll get a lot of like, we had, what about Emma Thompson for an
Oh
influencer
yeah,
campaign? And I
what?
was like, love her, nation sweetheart, amazing. Have you been on her Instagram? She last posted like a picture of her cat in like 2019.
Yeah.
So it's, people can sometimes get confused about what the actual purpose of an influencer is.
Exactly. And
So
again, like that can be part of the whole like potentially like not outdated, but a lot of marketing teams or whatever like might have been a bit more like familiar with the whole kind of celebrity
mhm.
endorsements and that side of things and everything, whereas the whole influencer marketing industry's come in and changed the game, and how you work with talent as a whole is quite different these days essentially. um
I do think that defining influencer marketing is still something that the industry has not quite figured out, and everyone's got
yeah.
like their own definition. But ultimately, I think you've got to take it from the pool of influence. And when we're talking about influencers, you should be able to track an impact that they've had. Now, we know that measuring revenue can be tricky, particularly if you're not using discount codes and you're not really going down that performance driving route, or you've got a product that might be slightly longer tail in terms of its conversion window. But that is what an influencer as such should be. And then like celebrity spokespeople are really for the face and like the creative, I would
Yeah,
say.
absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
I think one thing I really wanted to talk on was just like the key metrics that we would look at. So, say you've launched your influencer ambassador program, you're getting to the end of the first 3 months, and you want to look back at your influencers and see who's performed against your success benchmarks and who hasn't. What should those success benchmarks be?
So, as it's an investment, anything like cost per impression, cost per
Yeah.
reach, whatever your core main objective is, typically those are the kind of main ones.
Yeah.
100% you want to be measuring that.
And you can also use cost per reach when it comes to influencers as a way to make sure that you're paying a
Hmm.
fair fee. And it just means you can say, like, well, traditionally for influencers, we've paid X amount per one person reached. Trickier to do impressions for influencers because you don't get impression data on all of the
Exactly.
platforms. So we'd suggest looking at it from a cost per reach
Hmm.
perspective and then using that to kind of calculate what a fair fee would be. Now, it is worth saying that like influencers completely reserve the right to try and charge you whatever is Scooby they want to, but at least you can go back to them and say like, by our standard calculations, we'd be looking at this, and you can use it as a negotiation
Yeah.
tactic
And like,
too.
of course, you're working with them. They're not always just delivering reach.
Yeah.
It's their content creation abilities, it's their audience, it's their experience of engaging audiences and taking briefs
And
and so on
some
and
of
so
them are
forth.
really
But
niche as well.
yeah.
So the more niche you get,
the higher
the
that
higher
might
it's going to
look.
be.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think sometimes people forget like that plays into paid media too. Like the more niche your audience is, the higher your
Yeah.
CPMs are going to go. So don't forget those traditional digital marketing metrics whenever you're looking into influencer
Yeah,
marketing too.
absolutely.
So we've got like cost per reach, CPM basis. Equally, if you can, you'd be looking at like a return on influencer spend, basically. Tricky. And I think, don't forget that they will have a longer term impact on that, but it should be something that's looked at.
Yeah.
I think reach rate is a really good
Mhm.
one to look at. And also when you're vetting, that can be
Yeah.
strong too.
Yeah,
Because we always
exactly.
try and aim for about like 15% reach rate at minimum.
Yeah.
But then if you're working on platforms like TikTok, you would expect their reach rate to be significantly higher
Yeah.
than their follower number, just because of the way the platform works. So that's another point to make, is that you can't apply your metrics for Instagram straight through to TikTok. They need to be different.
Mhm.
Engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. They have an audience. You as a brand want said influencer to be able to take your brief, take your objectives and messaging and translate that into a language. Sounds very airy fairy, but you want them to be able to take that
Hmm.
and, really engage their audience on what it is that you have to offer, what it is you're promoting and everything. So a healthy engagement rate. Typically, we look at 3%
Hmm.
plus. 3 to 6 is considered good, really. We also use our own kind of weighted engagement rate
Yeah.
as well, where we're looking at a save, for example, as having higher value as opposed to a metric such as a like. So therefore, it kind of
Yeah.
shows the value of the content to their
And
audience.
that's a good way to kind of look at actual, and it is a bit airy fairy, but ultimately if someone's saving something, it means that they want to go back and look at it. So if you have got a longer conversion window, that can be a good indication
Yeah.
that people are saving it for future. And I think another thing that people can look at for influencers is how engaged has that influencer been? Have they like proactively been coming to you and being like, hey, I'd love to do this content idea? If you are working with them on a longer term basis, so, you're basically paying them a monthly salary as such to deliver XYZ. Have they done anything like extra off their own back? Like in the same way that you would with a job, you want to see people going above and
Yeah.
beyond.
You want to be working with someone who wants to work
Yeah.
with you. And that's really important. So, them coming to you with ideas of actually, maybe we could consider this, or let's try this thing out. Like, you want to see that level of engagement with you and the brand,
Hmm.
or between said influencer and the brand. But equally, yeah, you want to see that they are genuinely engaging with their community. That only helps aid their content
Hmm.
regardless, and everything, rather than the one, you sometimes see influencers, they'll do their post and then that's that. They just let it sit
Hmm.
and they like won't engage with their audience. Everyone's like, where's this from? Or like, what about this? Or they'll like ask questions and it's just empty. And you just think, well, that's not really what you want. You want conversation to be happening. You want to be building a community
Yeah.
with this particular audience. If you're putting in that level of investment with an ambassador, I would 100% expect that they would be regularly engaging
Yeah.
with their community by so many different means.
Yeah. So I think when we're looking at those, we would kind of split it into performance driven metrics and then like our brand favorite metrics,
Mhm.
which would be things like that. And then if we add affiliates into the
Yes.
mix, that obviously adds another level of complexity, but they can be really effective for some brands. And I think the thing to remember with affiliates is sometimes you'll set up a code for them and it's kind of up to them to post as they kind of wish. You might put like some minimum posting requirements in there, like you need to post or mention the brand at least twice a month.
Mhm.
But if they start to see the results of that, that's going to incentivize them to post more about it. When we're looking at affiliates, it's important to cleanse your affiliate list and just making sure that one, have they filled their posting requirements? And two, have they actually achieved anything off the back of it? So is their audience reacting in the way that we'd hoped,
Yeah.
i.e., purchasing off of it? And then if that hasn't been happening, then you probably should look at cleansing it, because the last thing you want to end up is a list of affiliates that, you've got like 200 people on there and only 50% of them are really active and earning off
Yeah,
the
for
back of
sure.
it. So I think that's just a note to use the same principles and to just cleanse your affiliate list if you are
Yeah,
utilizing that in that
absolutely.
perspective. So yeah, I mean, I think Moral of the story is just influencer, you can't switch it on and switch it off again.
Nope, you can't. Gotta keep it going. It's people you're trying to engage with at the end of the day, and people want to hear from people at the end of the day as well. So, they want to hear genuine advocacy from someone who truly believes in what it is that you've got available. So those one-hit wonder kind of collaborations and campaigns, they're never going to really drive the value that you can really be getting from a longer term partnership.
Yeah. So I think people just need to do the channel justice, if that makes sense. And sometimes people put parameters in place and strategies in place that really don't do that. So yeah, we would definitely favor an ambassador approach if you can. But thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time.